All right. Hello, everyone. Not sure how many people are tuning in right now. I haven't really posted this anywhere, but this is just one of these patron requests that I get because a lot of people have been saying, why do you do these live streams on sort of like these easy targets? And I just want to address that because it's not my own choosing. I'm not seeking these things out in order to respond to them. This is where like a patron wants me to respond to them, and so I do it. So I understand like the argument that this channel purports to be like trying to add a lot of in-depth theological discussion and to really cut to the the depths of these things. So why am I wasting time on these more easy targets? Well, part of what I do is I do let patrons decide some of the content that I make, some of it, because like a lot of content I just make on my own, and I'm gonna keep doing that. A lot of the short form videos that I've been doing lately, streams of my own choosing, that's all still going on. But I do like to offer services, for if people really want me to address something or respond to something, I'll do it, as part of the Patreon thing. So I just wanted to address that. And sometimes, on occasion, these more, I guess you could say, like goofy, less serious critics of Catholicism, sometimes they present an opportunity to actually go into some amount of depth on something, even if they don't touch on much depth. They can offer, in some cases, an opportunity for me to do so. And I'm hoping that's what we'll get here. I haven't really looked at this before, so, but without further ado, let's just kind of start looking at it, see what they've got to say. I understand it's just a compilation of various different Protestant detractors of Catholicism, but we'll see what they have to say. Oh, thank you, Josh, for you. I appreciate that you like my videos. And if any of you want to add into the discussion, you can either do that through sending a super chat, or I will keep my eye on the live chat as well. But it's a great way to support the stream if you wanted to send a super chat or even a power chat at powerchat.live/classicaltheist. So all right, let's get started.
I'm sad to report that Ulf Ekman,
Oh, whoa. Who is this guy?
major charismatic leader in Sweden, with a congregation of over 3,000 and a ministry that reached over 100,000, has become a Roman Catholic.
Oh, no, the horror.
So has Alex Jones, not the internet personality, an American pastor.
Oh, I was going to say, what? That'd be cool if that happened, but that is not likely at all.
Along with 62 members of his former congregation, they literally closed the church and joined the Catholic Church. And Jones even wrote a book about it. You know the old saying, all roads lead to Rome? What road did these guys take that led them to Rome? According to their own testimony,
We have a question from the live chat. Hang on, I gotta clear my throat. So Josh for you asks, quick question. Thomas says the divine relations are the divine essence, but one thing I can't wrap my head around is how is the essence of God not begotten then? And yeah, I mean that is a pretty good question. What I would say about that is, while the divine relations are the divine essence, you have to understand that the properties of begottenness or of inessibility when we're talking about the Father, these when we're talking about notional acts, these specifically pertain to the opposition, the opposing relations within the Trinity in their relationality. And so while the relations are the divine essence in their being, in their substance, when we're talking about these notional acts, that is a reference to specifically how they relate to each other in their intra-Trinitarian relationality. So, to say, for example, that paternity, filiation, active and passive spiration, when we say that these relations are the divine essence, we're saying that the subsistent being of each one of those relations is the divine essence. The divine essence is the being of all of those relations. But that is saying something different. Like to say that is not necessarily to reduce all of the ratios, like intelligible reasons that go into our understanding of what these relations are as relations. And so as relations, so long as we're still talking about their relative opposition with respect to each other, what we say about those things does not reduce altogether to the divine essence itself. But that's just a really quick, rough answer. I'll play this, but if I think of anything additional to say about that, I'll just kind of like come back to it.
What gave them their direction was reading and believing the writings of the Roman Catholic Church Fathers. Who are these Church Fathers and how did they lead them to Rome? Hi, I'm David Daniels for Chick Publications. People called the Church Fathers were early Catholic leaders who wrote about the Bible and early doctrines that were being formulated and taught and debated for the Catholic Church. When I was at Fuller Seminary, they divided the Church Fathers, to make it easy, into groups. The major dividing line was the First Roman Catholic Council, Constantine's Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. So all the writers that came before 325 are called ante-Nicene, and the ones at and after 325 are Nicene and post-Nicene Fathers. They also distance them or divide them by how far they are from the apostles themselves. So the Apostolic Fathers are based on how far distance they are within the first 3 generations after the apostles died. And then there are Latin Fathers and there are Greek Fathers based on the language in which they wrote. But don't be deceived.
Right, because I'm sorry, I'm still on the Trinity issue. Because when we're talking about, we can make a distinction between the. Oh wait, so he says, so the mode of signification esse in and esse ad will differ in virtue of relative opposition because they aren't similar concepts. Yeah, because we're talking here about the meaning, like the intelligible meaning of these distinct relations insofar as they relate to each other. They're being toward each other and they're being from each other. And so when we're speaking in terms of that being toward or being from, that the meaning of that, like the intelligible structure of that, requires us to truly and properly distinguish between the subsisting persons themselves. And that is a real distinction between the persons. And by virtue of the reality of that distinction between the persons, we can talk very meaningfully about the differentiating notional acts between each of the persons of the Trinity, even as we recognize that the being of these relations is none other than the divine essence. Okay, so now I'll actually pay some degree of attention to what this guy is saying.
Despite what the Catholic system says, there is no such thing as the unanimous consent of the Church Fathers.
Well, let's talk about that, actually. Let's talk about unanimous consent. Because now, I'm sure what I'm about to say and what he's saying are on two entirely different wavelengths of theological depth within the Catholic system. But what I will say about unanimous consent of the fathers is, yes, some Catholics, they sometimes are a bit too quick to assert that their pet theories, their pet theological theories, are backed up by the unanimous consent of the fathers, just because they can point to a whole bunch of fathers that support their position. And it's not that easy, right? It's not as easy as, it's not just a matter of finding fathers that support your position. Unanimous consent of the fathers, in order to carry like infallible theological weight, more needs to be done. Like, you have to show, for example, that the fathers together are manifesting some intention to exegete some scriptural passage as a necessary interpretation for like the basic integrity of the gospel. That sort of intention has to be manifest in some way. It can't just be like, Jerome happens to have this opinion on some obscure theological text or scriptural text, and then other fathers happen to agree. Like, that's not sufficient. You have to add on to that the further demonstration that they're actually trying to put forward their exegesis of Scripture as in some way binding on the faithful. So that is something that I think Catholics should be more mindful of, so that we don't just run around and say, just sloppily assert unanimity of the fathers when it's the requirements for that are a little bit more complex. But that being said, there are things that the fathers are unanimous on. I mean, one of those things I would strongly argue would be, the regenerative nature of baptism, the fact that baptism truly has a salvific effect. Another thing would be the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. I would actually argue that the sacrificial nature of the Mass has unanimous consent of the fathers. These kinds of foundational Catholic doctrines, but also foundational sacramental doctrines. Also, they are pretty unanimous on the hierarchical, on the basic hierarchical structure of like the episcopate, on like the sacerdotal priesthood. You'd be hard pressed to find like a father who actually disagrees with any of that, and they do express some theological gravity in their consensus on these issues.
That's just a lot of hooey. These aren't fathers of the church. They didn't father the church. That was done a long time before by the Lord Jesus Christ, long before these guys were even born. They only fathered Roman Catholicism. luring people away from the Scriptures and into the opinions of men.
So that's interesting. So seems to be of the opinion that the only fathers of the church would basically be the apostles. And that any amount of like consensus on part of their immediate successors is just completely worthless. And you know, how do you square that with Jesus's promise? Like, how do you square that with Jesus promising that he will be with his church unto the end of the age? How do they square that with the fact that Paul explicitly hands on to Titus and Timothy the apostolic mandate that he received from Christ? I mean, are we really to believe that he had an expectation that in passing on this apostolic mandate, Titus and Timothy weren't going to be given the same protection of the Holy Spirit that he was given? I mean, it's just absurd.
But I do read and believe the church fathers. You want to know which ones? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, Paul, James, and Jude. These are the real church fathers. These are the men who wrote by the inspiration of God. What they wrote is absolutely infallible. And they totally agree with one another, as all 40-plus authors do in the Bible. So they're the only true church fathers, but I don't really like to call them fathers. Instead, I like to do what Jesus said in Matthew 23, verse 9. And call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father.
Well, that's it, because Paul explicitly refers to spiritual fathers. So apparently the fathers of the church don't even extend to Paul, because like Paul himself refers to spiritual fathers. And like in that same passage, like he also it's not just call no man father. He's also there's a further exaggeration there of doing away with other kinds of familial terms that we all know are appropriate in other settings, but for the purpose of what Christ was teaching, we understand that he's referring to these things in absolute terms.
Which is in heaven. God bless you and have a wonderful day.
I hate to disappoint you, but I wasn't a Catholic. But I was with a Catholic priest the night that he accepted Islam. And I asked him these questions you asked me. Because after all...
So Josh, for you, asks if I think the Trinity is absolutely necessary. Well, I mean, it is absolutely necessary because it's the nature of God as he is in himself. And so God necessarily does diffuse himself from within himself according to Trinitarian relations. And he does that by necessity of his own inner life. But that's a whole different question from whether or not it's absolutely necessary in order to be logically discernible without the help of grace, and that I don't maintain. I certainly don't maintain that. Now I've gone so far as saying that I've gone so far as saying that a proper understanding of the Trinity does solve otherwise insoluble problems when it comes to reconciling divine immanence and divine transcendence. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the Trinity is in itself provable from reason. It just means that, natural reason can only get you so far in probing the mysteries of God, and that natural reason can still suspect that there are there are mysteries about even natural theology that don't have completely satisfactory solutions merely within the domain of natural theology. So like, the fact that we know that the good is diffusive of itself, we know that from reason. And so therefore we know that God, who is the supreme good, is infinitely diffusive of himself. And yet, we also know that creation is a result of God's self-diffusion in some way. And so we have to ask, the question of, in what way then does God's self-diffusive character as the supreme good, in what way does that relate to himself without consideration of creation? Because that has to be possible, right? We have to concede, we have to recognize that God is self-communicative within himself prior to creation, because we know that he's not compelled to create. He doesn't have any necessity to create the world. Like that's solely as a result of his sovereignly free choice to do so. But we also know that he remains self-communicative within himself, and so that creates a certain conundrum, a certain mystery that the Trinity is able to provide a satisfactory answer. But we wouldn't be able to come to the conclusion of how God is self-diffusive within himself according to Trinitarian relations if it weren't revealed to us. So that's what I would say about that.
I was still a Christian, a preacher in Christianity, and I wanted to know why my best friend, a Catholic priest, had converted. That's a pretty weird thing. A Catholic priest is not like a regular preacher in the Protestant religion. A Catholic priest has given up everything. He's given up his life.
Well, it's funny, absurd scandal. Like, I actually think that, if you come to the conclusion that there are persons in God, it has to be three. It has to be three because of, the principle of relative opposition, and the fact that when God fully communicates himself in the word, in the person of the Word, that is an exhaustive self-communication because God is infinite. And so he can't just keep infinitely begetting sons. If he's going to beget a son, it's going to be one son, because God, if he begets, will beget exhaustively by virtue of his infinitude, by virtue of his divine infinitude. And so the tripersonal nature of God's processions, of God's internal processions, follows necessarily from the fact that there are real processions and relations in God. So that's what I would say about that. I think that the fact that there are subsistent persons in God, that's only comes about from divine revelation. But the triune nature of that, given subsistent persons within God, follows logically.
Life to be a Catholic priest. When he enters into this realm, he's basically given away.
I have no
everything.
idea what this
He can't
guy's
have a wife,
talking
he
about.
can't have children, obviously no grandchildren.
I'm
He
kind of
has no
spending
home.
more
He
time
just
on the
lives
live
in
chat than
a
the
rectory
video.
or wherever
Hope that's
they give him
okay.
a place to stay, and he's sent wherever they tell him to go, do whatever he's told to do, and that's it. And he cannot disobey the Pope, otherwise they can kick him out of the religion, and if they do, he's excommunicated, and he goes to hell forever.
Well, I think Lofton would find that based.
So how would a person like this want to become one of those Muslim terrorists? That's what I wanted to know. He explained in a very few beautiful words.
You know, he kind of, I was going to say he kind of looks like Lofton, but not really.
Something that I came to learn for myself. He said that he was sincerely in the Catholic religion because he believed in God. That he had studied, his degree was in theology, and a part of the teaching that they as priests have is to study Islam. Every priest is forced to study Islam. Now you may not know that, but you can ask your priest and he'll confirm it. And when you study Islam, even when Islam is taught to you by somebody who hates Islam, as long as they don't corrupt it too far, you can still see the truth in Islam. A classical example happened to me just recently when I was in Saudi Arabia. A friend of mine, very old copy of one of the first Qurans ever translated to English by George Sale. George Sale hated Islam, he hated the Muslims, but when he translated the Quran to English, he was true to the text of the words. Although maybe not getting all the meaning, he certainly was true to the text of the words. I was shocked when I read it. Have you seen it? You know what I'm talking about? Amazing. And listen to this. George Bernard Shaw, for instance, is one of many, a long list of people who read this and realized the truth of Islam. When people see the truth of Islam, it can change them if they want to be guided. If they want to,
I'm not sure how it can react to this guy. I mean, he's just saying things. He's not really
truth, it can change
making
them.
an argument.
You might think, I'm a Catholic, I'll never be anything but a Catholic. But I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest. This is not for you to, start a debate, but just be honest. Was Jesus a Catholic?
They applaud that. they applaud that line, really?
And it's not open to debate, so there's no point in opening that up because you know and I know he was.
I mean, that's just such a stupid thing to say. Like, no, Jesus was not a member of his own mystical body. He is the head of his mystical body.
Wasn't. The Catholic Church was in business about 300 years before Jesus was born. It's on their website. Don't go.
To be Catholic is to be in Jesus. It's to be incorporated into his mystical body. Like, that's what being Catholic really means at the end of the day.
Like this, it's on their website. That's where I took it from. The Catholic Church was really started in Rome by Alexander the Great. Do you know what the word Catholic means?
Oh.
It means universal. It was the universal church for the Roman Empire.
Alexander the Great,
if you didn't join it, you could not be a Roman citizen.
That's
and
interesting.
And it was opposed to the teachings of Judaism.
I mean, look, in one sense, like, I do think that the Catholic Church, the Church of Christ, does, well, you know what, Catholicism, it did in a way exist before Christ because it's the same people of God. It's the continuation of the people of God. It's the continuation of the people of Israel. And more to it, like the Catholic Church has kind of taken on this role of inheriting all of the different treasures of Greco-Roman civilization. And so considered in that sense, I kind of do, I would take in like a small strand of thought of what he's saying and incorporate it into sanity. That's what I would say about that.
And opposed to the teachings of the early Christians for more than 200 and some years. And they were diametrically opposed to it.
Well, RTH, so yeah, I have a Discord. I hardly use it. I've been thinking of making a Discord channel, though. Like, what I've been thinking of doing lately is making some kind of either Discord or Telegram that would kind of be, like, the purpose of it would sort of be to like research and discuss and explore ways in which to perfect like the hermeneutic of continuity that Pope Benedict spoke about, as well as like finding ways to like reconcile or synthesize the Catholic intellectual tradition with the more conservative, like reactionary political ideology that many of us are kind of more or less immersed in. So those, and of course, also on, exploring deeper into, the scholastic tradition. But I mean, there's already discords that are devoted to that. I wouldn't be reinventing the wheel for that. But those other two purposes, I've been thinking about creating some kind of like community centered around that mission. But I don't know if anybody would be interested in that.
Each other to the extent that it was the Romans killing the early Christians. Now, if you understand that, and you go to their website and read, they didn't even take over Christianity until the year 325 AD. And when they did, they changed a lot of things. Again, referring to their own website. But if you want to check it in Britannica or Americana,
what did he say?
Or website, and when they did take over Christianity, found that, and you go to their website and read. Now, if you understand that, and you go to their website and read, they didn't even take over Christianity until the year 325 AD. And when they did, they changed a lot of things. Again, referring to their own website. But if you want to check it in Britannica or Americana or Grover,
on their website, okay.
Encyclopedias, go ahead and read about the Catholic Church. When, in August of 325 AD, at the Nicaea Council, they took over, first thing they said was, let's change the date of the birth of Jesus to be the same date as that of Mithras, which was the god, one of the gods worshipped there, and also the sun god's birthday was the same day, December the 20th.
It's like he's just getting all these things from, like, Jesus mythicists and atheists, and like even that is extremely fringe stuff, like academically, and that's what Muslims do. Like Muslims will often borrow from the most laughable material. Like they will borrow from the most discredited segments of, like, not even academia, but just like internet atheism in general. Like when it comes to denying the historicity of the crucifixion, this stuff that he's talking about right now, that's one of the ways that you kind of can write off Islam pretty quickly, is just how untenable, how they sort of root their like central claims of their religion in just manifestly discredited historical narratives. Like no one seriously doubts the crucifixion of Jesus, for example. No one seriously doubts that.
Believing it to be the shortest day of the year. And Constantine was a sun worshiper of Sol Invictus. Go to the website, read it for yourself. There are a lot of points, but not the least of which, even today, if you go in any Catholic church, and I have, you'll see so many portraits and statues and idols and images throughout the whole place that for the one who's never experienced that, for a Muslim who knows about these images, he'll be like, whoa, I was beloved. Whoa.
Yeah, because you don't believe that, like, you don't believe that God became man. So of course you wouldn't believe that use of art or statues or icons can convey anything about the supernatural order legitimately, because God hasn't taken that initiative to sanctify those elements.
Is this? The first time I walked in a Catholic church, I was about 10 years old. I was shocked. I was shocked at the idols and statues everywhere, because in the Protestant religion, we were brought up to believe that the second commandment was just as important as the first commandment. The first commandment in the Bible, in Exodus, is the same as the first commandment in the book of Deuteronomy. It says, I am the Lord your God that brought you out of the land of Egypt in the house of bondage. You know no other God beside me. Beside me there's no other gods. Thou shalt not have any other gods beside me. How many in this room agree with that commandment? Raise your hand. You notice the Muslims are raising their hand, because it means Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. That's the first commandment for us as well. The second commandment you have clearly says, thou shalt not make any idol, any graven image of anything that creeps upon the earth, swims in the sea beneath, or flies in the air above.
Which is a clear, obviously that's referring to, that is a direct application of the first commandment. Because you have no other gods, you don't make any graven images in the likeness of any of these other gods. So no graven images of these earthly things worshipped as gods. It's so obvious that it's just a further application of the first commandment, as a specific mode of idolatry. It's not referring to images created or that are for the purpose of worshiping the true God.
Because if you said God is more than one, where did you get it from? When Jesus is talking to his...
obviously, as Tom says in the chat, there were God had instructed images to be made, statues to be made. I mean, the Ark of the Covenant, for example, and other things.
His own companions, and they ask him, what's the greatest commandment? Mark 12:29. Clear. The greatest commandment is to know, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God. And you have to love him with all your heart and all your mind and all your strength. And this is no different from what Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was saying, the same thing to his people. Same thing I mentioned in the lecture. This is certainly for us the same. So what you see is Muslims practicing the commandments, and you see people claiming the commandments but practicing something
Thanks, Hap. God bless you too.
else. And I have seen more converts from the Catholic Church than any other of the many sects of Christianity, and especially from the nuns.
That may be true from ordinary Catholics who don't really practice or believe in their faith, but you're hard pressed to find an actual committed, educated, sophisticated Catholic deconvert from Catholicism. That maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've just been interacting with. Maybe I have biases given the kinds of people I interact with, but I actually don't find it very common for sophisticated and theologically erudite Catholics to deconvert from Catholicism to some other denomination, especially not to Islam. But I find it all the time where erudite Protestants convert to Catholicism. But again, maybe I'm sounding ridiculous. I could be wrong about that, but it's just in my limited experience. Could be totally wrong about that, but
priests and even an archbishop, and all of them are better than me.
I'd love them to actually name those names. By the way, notice he doesn't name anybody.
Guys and women that I see do this, they still sacrifice their whole life to get the true message of Islam, not only to you, but to Muslims as well, because we all need to know about it. But thanks for a great question.
Well, I'm glad that's over. Oh, this guy, Lutheran Satire. Wow. I remember that guy. He made, I think he was pretty popular 10 years ago. Is he still making videos? So she says, I respond to the claim that Mary is not sinless. I mean, there are all sorts of ways to get at that. Obviously, the fact that she's full of grace, and that she's meant to be the place where the Lord's glory dwells. And if she has this role to play, like, how can that coincide with sin? Another thing that I would say is that, and this is more of a theological argument, this is more of an abstract argument, but I think it's true. I think it's important. And like I said, I didn't come prepared with a whole bunch of other scriptural references to back up the sinlessness of Mary here, but I did want to make this one argument, which is that Jesus' sacrifice is perfect and complete and efficacious. And it seems to me that what purely on the side of creation, what guarantees the perfect efficaciousness of Christ's sacrifice and his redemptive merits is the sinlessness of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Because the Blessed Virgin Mary is essentially, one of her roles is to perfectly receive the efficacious redemptive merits of Christ won for us on the cross. That if even Mary was sinful, well, then there would be no pocket within creation that could perfectly receive the redemptive merits of Christ's sacrifice. And so it'd be difficult to see how his sacrifice was perfectly efficacious if it could not perfectly be received in at least one creature. And so the Blessed Virgin Mary, in her sinlessness, enables the redemptive fruits of Christ to be perfectly efficaciously received in creation itself, through the Blessed Virgin Mary. Which is why the Blessed Virgin Mary is the proto, she's the archetype of the church, because the church is spotlessly holy, and the Blessed Virgin Mary, in her sinlessness, in her perfect receptivity to divine grace, archetypally signifies the church for us. And so I think, the fact that she's able to receive everything that the redemptive work of Christ on the cross had to offer, that in a very special way provides a solid basis upon which we can say that the sacrifice of Christ was absolutely and perfectly efficacious, because it did seep it was able to reach without any interruption at least one creature, the Blessed Virgin Mary. So G Moneypod says, then why couldn't her marriage with Joseph be consummated? Well, I mean, for one, it wouldn't have fulfilled the virginal status of the Mother of God. Her virginity is integral to her role. Because she's she's given herself entirely over to this salvific role. And virginity really does signify that complete and absolute devotedness to her true divine spouse, the Holy Spirit. And so, would that have tainted her sinlessness? Of course not. Of course it wouldn't have tainted her sinlessness. But she was called to something far higher than that. Juan Plaza, thank you very much for the $8 super chat, and I'm glad you appreciated my answer.
Do we really want peace? Then let's ban all weapons so we don't have to live in fear of war.
Wait, you tweeted that?
Totally.
Why?
Because, dude, war is bad, man. Do you even know why war is bad?
Because people die?
Okay, I'm sorry, Absurd Scandal, but I might agree a little bit more with Lutheran satire on this one, because he did tweet that. I mean, am I wrong? He did tweet that everybody should just lay down their arms. And that was, I think, one of the most absurd things that... I mean, I'm not one to say that Pope Francis is constantly doing absurd things, because I don't believe that. I think that a lot of what he says is actually very needed. But maybe I should modify that. Some of what he says is very much needed. A lot of what he says is just not that much of a big deal. But some of what he says, it's a little bit difficult to deal with. And that thing he tweeted a few years ago about everyone laying down their weapons, and it just struck me as it struck me as a little asinine. I'm sorry, it was just kind of infantile.
Whoa, lucky guess.
I agree that war and death are bad, Frank, but the problem is that bad people will always want to kill good people with the weapons they won't give up. So, as Romans 13 and 1 Peter 2 tell us, sometimes war and weapons are necessary to stop the murderous bad people.
And I'm not saying that Pope Francis rejects just war theory. I mean, he has made statements that I feel undermine just war theory by way of implication. And he's done this many times. But he hasn't come out and just straight up rejected the concept of a just war. He hasn't done that. But a lot of what he says, unfortunately, a lot of what he says about war and peace, it kind of blurs the distinction between, the call to supererogatorily rise above the need for violence, right? And so he conflates that with binding universal moral precepts sometimes. At least that's the impression that he gets. He doesn't necessarily formally commit himself to that conflation, but it comes across that way. It really does.
Agree to disagree, Edgar Allan, bro. We need to ban all weapons.
Well, here's the problem, Pope Menno Simmons I. You're not just disagreeing with me here, you're disagreeing with the church you lead. You see, the Catechism of the Catholic Church states, as long as the danger of war persists and there is no international authority with the necessary competence and power, governments cannot be denied the right of lawful self-defense once all peace efforts have failed. So, by urging for a worldwide ban of nukes, bunker busters, semi-automatics, machetes, and, I presume, Captain Caveman clubs, you're effectively rejecting official church teaching on just war theory.
Dude, how could I reject it if I've never even heard of it?
Come on, Frank, let's be honest. The only reason you're calling for a ban on all weapons is because you don't have any armies left to wield them anymore.
That's not true.
I mean, that's silly.
Oh, I bet it is.
I mean, he just has pacifistic tendencies. I mean, he's just always believed that. I mean,
Though I bet if you regained some of the political power you've lost throughout centuries of secularization, you'd change your tune about war and weapons right quick.
No, I wouldn't.
Bet you would.
No, I wouldn't.
Yeah, but you would.
Dude, no,
I hereby dissolve the Church of England, resubmit to your divine authority, and pledge the full might of the British military to the defense and expansion of the Catholic Church.
Shoot all the Protestants, bomb all the churches, then burn all the heretics, conquer the Holy Land, nuke all the Turks and the Shintos and Methodists, bang, bang, exploding, hooray for the Pope!
See, I told you.
Dude, Medici fugue states don't count.
By the way, you know you still have a bunch of guys protecting you with guns and swords and spears, right?
No, I don't.
Sure you do. The Swiss Guard.
The who?
You know, those guys with the Don Quixote armor and the Woody Woodpecker helmets and the red, blue, and gold uniforms that look like the state flag of Arizona had a baby with MC Hammer's pants.
Wait, those guys
that was really reaching for a funny joke.
are real?
Yeah.
Oh, for a second there, I thought we were hallucination twinsies.
Okay. See, Lutheran satire was never funny. I mean, that was the problem with them, is that they're not funny. Like, sometimes they make some reasonable points, but I've never really laughed at any other jokes.
So as we go through our series, End Times and Demons, it's important that one of the doctrines of the devils to really avoid is a cult led by Steven Anderson. He makes a...
I mean, I agree with that. I mean, so far so good. All right, so far so good. Let's see how long he can keep that up.
More than a 1-hour video just warning people about cult leaders, but he has no idea that he himself is the cult. Steven Anderson, this is a man that you should avoid because he
True.
supports New World Order Catholic doctrine.
Oh, okay. So just a few seconds then. Okay.
Now, why does he do so, Pastor? I'm going to show you why. He made 3 major documentaries, right? The third one, I think it's still in the making. The first one is after the tribulation. Now, he has several more documentaries that he made, but the ones that became
it's so over.
really famous is this one. The second one that became famous is this one. Marching to Zion. So this one is a post-tribulation rapture doctrine.
Oh, so is this guy like gonna say he's a cult leader because he's like anti-Semitic or something?
One is
That's interesting.
Replacement theology against the nation.
Gotta be careful about what we say about that on YouTube, though.
Of Israel. And this one is thinking that Babylon is what? USA, not Rome. So here are his 3 major documentaries, the most popular ones.
Documentaries? Maybe I'm dumb, but I've just never heard anyone pronounce it that way.
But coincidentally and strangely, his 3 most famous ones just happen to what? Support Catholic doctrine. It's covering up for the Catholics. Yeah. Let me explain right here. First of all, I'm going to give you his quote of his video on Revelation 18 verse-by-verse Bible study, January 2013. So first of all, he believes that Mystery Babylon of Revelation 17, I showed you in one video and proved it, that Revelation 17 is who? Is the Catholic Church. So this whore of Revelation, who's going to be a major player that Christians should be aware about, Anderson makes you divert attention away from this one and makes you focus on this one instead. But no, this is not what you should be focusing on. It should be this one.
Amen.
So this is wrong right here. It should be this one.
Okay, I mean, he didn't really give any argument for that, but...
So he says right here, quote, "Now that has led some people to mistakenly apply the Roman Catholic Church definition to chapter." He's talking about Revelation 17. "And that is simply not correct. But in chapter, we're dealing with another place altogether. And the city that is destroyed, or the place that is destroyed," it's interesting. He switches from city to place.
Subtle.
You see that? He's correcting your King James Bible. You know why? Because he knows that United States is not a city. City is Rome. So now he's switching to place. I don't know if some of you people who watch him caught that. Or you were just a robot watching Jim Jones, the cult leader, on YouTube.
That's right. Get out.
Yeah, I mean, we don't say it's the United States. I mean, it obviously refers to the pagan, to the Roman Empire that was responsible for slaughtering, for the persecution of Christians. And, yeah.
"And the city that is destroyed, or the place that is destroyed, called Babylon, I believe, is the United States." Well, whoop-de-doo-dah, it is. So notice right here, he makes you divert attention away from the real enemy to this one. Now, let me show you another one. Catechism 762. So not only does he show a cover-up to divert your attention away from the real enemy, the Catholic Church, he also supports the post-tribulation rapture doctrine. This doctrine is a doctrine of the Catholic Church, you must understand.
Amen.
Guess who believes and teaches this? The Roman Catholic Church, not Bible-believing Christians. The Roman Catholic Church. The proof is Catechism 762. Quote, this is what the Catholics teach in their catechism: "The remote preparation for this gathering..."
Well, I mean, we also teach that, like, Jesus is God. So, like, if someone can, let's say for the sake of argument, Catholicism is false. If someone could be at fault for believing a doctrine simply because Catholics also teach it, then you would have to assert that Jesus isn't God and all sorts of other things that, just obviously a ridiculous argument.
Gathering together of the people of God begins when he calls Abraham and promises that he will become the father of a great people. Okay, excuse me, this one is not about the post-tribulation rapture. We'll come to that one later. But this one is about replacement theology. So replacement theology, in other words, the nation of Israel is replaced by the church. By the church.
Based?
So God forsook the nation of Israel and decided to turn his attention to the church instead. So this doctrine is Catholic.
Let's go.
As well. So Catechism 762, I read part of it, so let me continue reading. He calls Abraham and promises that he will become the father of a great people. Its immediate preparation begins with Israel's election as a people of God. By this election, Israel to be the sign of the future gathering of all nations. But the prophets accuse Israel of breaking the covenant and behaving like a prostitute. They announce a new and eternal covenant. Christ instituted this new covenant. And thus the Christians, the church, are the replacement. So that's why he should...
Well, I mean, I would quibble. It's not so much a replacement, but the continuation. It's not to say that the old covenant was revoked, but it's that the old covenant, this is the same unified covenant we're talking about. It's this new renewal of God's promises fulfilled in Christ and universalized to the whole world. And as was foretold in the Old Testament, right? The Old Testament, in many places, bears witness to the eventual universalization of the people of God. and even to the sacrifice, because Malachi, the prophecy of Malachi, refers to the universalization of the pure sacrifice offered to God from the rising of the sun to its setting, which is fulfilled in the Mass. And I mean, it's this continuation of the very same election now made universally available to the whole world.
Shows right here that the Christians, Christ, continued on his covenant with Israel. Because why? The covenant with Israel is gone, and it's going to be replaced, changed with Christ through the Christians. That's why Stephen Anderson teaches that the person who is a real Jew, person who's a real part of Israel that's continuing the covenant, is those who are saved Christians. That's what he teaches. But we believe Christians are the spiritual nation, spiritual Israel. God's physical nation, his covenant with physical nation of Israel, still continues. That's what we teach.
That's insanity. Like, that is just absolute, like, just bonkers. Like, that, see, I mean, it's because they are so focused on removing any resemblance to Catholicism that they refuse to discern the typology of the Old Testament outside of explicit of very obvious and straightforward references to Jesus himself. So when they read the Old Testament and it references Israel as a nation, like, because they have stripped themselves off of like the depth of the Catholic faith, then anything in the Old Testament that might typify or signify or foreshadow various other Catholic doctrines, they're just going to read those Old Testament passages as Jews would, and no different from how Jews would. So when Jews read the Old Testament references to Israel and like the promises and the prophecies that are said about Israel, well, they just see that as, referring to the Jewish state, as Jewish Israel. And apparently this guy thinks the same thing, because if he didn't, then he might draw some connection between what the Old Testament is really talking about in the eyes of faith and what the Catholic Church believes about various other doctrines, such as the visible structure of the true church.
Teach and preach. This is a Roman Catholic doctrine that Stephen Anderson support. Coincidentally, in his other major documentary, Coincidentally. Look, there's a lot of subjects you can cover, right? Yeah. Why these things as sympathizers with Catholic Church? Strange, isn't it? Here's another one. Post-tribulation rapture. Catechism 675 and 677. Stephen Anderson believes that the church will go through the tribulation and get raptured afterwards. Roman Catholic Church teach that too. Before Christ's second coming, the church must pass through a final trial that will shake the faith of many believers. The persecution that accompanies her pilgrimage on earth will unveil the mystery of iniquity. See,
why doesn't this guy use present tense verbs, like teaches? It's just very strange how this guy talks sometimes.
See the Antichrist, the tribulation, in the form of a religious deception, offering men as apparent solution to their problems at the price of apostasy from the truth. The supreme religious deception is that of the Antichrist, a pseudo-messianism by which man glorifies himself in place of God and of his Messiah come in the flesh. The church will enter the glory of the kingdom only through this final Passover, when she will follow her Lord in his death and resurrection. The kingdom will be fulfilled then, not by a historic triumph of the church through a progressive ascendancy, but only by God's victory over the final unleashing of evil, which will cause his bride to come down from heaven. God's triumph over the revolt of evil will take the form of the last judgment after the final cosmic upheaval of this passing world. So you notice right here that through this cataclysmic event, the Roman Catholic Church says that the church will go through this trial, through this final Passover, they called it. So they believe in post-tribulation rapture doctrine, that the church Christians will go through the tribulation. So,
I mean, like, why wouldn't we? Like, this guy has no conception of the imitation of Christ. Like, this guy has no conception of what the spiritual life is really all about, which is imitating Jesus in his sufferings, in his sacrificial love of the Father. And, like, of course, if sanctification is strengthened most exquisitely through redemptive suffering, then it would make all the sense in the world for Christians to have to undergo those final tribulations of the world. Get like immediately prior to his second coming. It just fits so well with the spirituality of the New Testament, which is to show your love for Christ, your love for God, in and through your willingness to undergo suffering, to take up your cross, to participate in the passion of the Lord.
incidentally, his other major documentary, it supports Catholic doctrine. So that's my question.
I mean, what does Paul say? I will glory in nothing but the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ. Like, Paul is always touching on the glory of the way of the cross. And so, you know, if anything, we should want to be there to undergo those tribulations, because that's how we show our love for God, and that's actually how charity for God is sharpened and intensified.
My question is, why is it that his major documentaries, I know he made other ones, but his major ones,
why does he say it like that?
That coincidentally get a lot of attention on YouTube are the ones that sympathizes with the Catholics.
Yeah, absurd. I mean, you're basically saying some of the things that I'm saying, so I totally agree with what you're saying there, for sure.
And isn't it interesting that his other documentary about defending the King James Bible, he would...
Okay, thank you, Topper. I'm glad I'm not the only one who says that, because like I was beginning to question myself. Is that like that can't be an acceptable way to pronounce that word? It just can't be. But he's so like, has he not heard documentary before? Like has he not heard? He's like the only person I've ever seen in my life say it that way. So like, who is he? Like, who has he heard it from, such that he thinks it's an acceptable way to say it in that way? I don't know.
Use that to show I'm like you, KJV Bible believers. And through that, where he deceives the people, I'm a KJV Bible believer like you, now he can infiltrate by putting Catholic doctrine into their head. Oh, Pastor, no. Have you heard about the Jesuit oath? The Jesuit oath? You know what their job is? Their job?
It's just really sad how, like, this is probably, I would go on a limb and say this is probably their church service. Maybe it's not, but like, their church services aren't all that much different from this kind of thing. It's just Sunday worship for them is just nothing more than a lecture. It's nothing more than just talking and listening. It's just such an impoverished way to approach divine worship.
Is to act like you, infiltrate your committee, get comfortable like you, and slyly insert some Catholic influence.
By the way, like, the oath that they take is public. Like, I'm pretty sure they say an oath, but anyone can, like, go there and listen to what is actually being... And I've heard that, like, Protestants, they like, as far as I know, I haven't looked into the super in any degree of, like, detail, but what I've heard is that there's been these, like, fake copies of the quote-unquote Jesuit oath, and they're, like, the most original copy of that is just found in, like, a Protestant source. So it's like it originates in, like, Protestant polemics, and it just has always stayed within Protestant polemics.
Influence to make you sympathize with them, but they will still remain.
So you had a question from Omega Hannibal. He says, off-topic question for your part 2 of the Novus Ordo analysis. Will you compare the different actions taken throughout the Mass and the changes in symbolisms associated with that? No, I am going to talk about that quite a bit, because that's one of the things that I feel has impoverished, to a large extent, the new right. Now, as far as I understand, one of the reasons why some of those were taken out was so that you would remove kind of like an occasion of mortal sin with priests, so that, like, if they neglected to perform each and every one of those gestures, they wouldn't be in grave sin. But, like, my whole thing on that is, like, okay, well, first of all, that doesn't justify just taking them all out, like, completely. Like, the Novus Ordo was supposed to be known for options, so why wouldn't they have just kept those options in there, kept those gestures in there? They all mean something. I mean, St. Thomas Aquinas, when he comments on the liturgy, he actually, there's a part in the Summa where he comments on the liturgy. He gives a theological description of each and every one of those gestures. So for example, like, all of the different signs of the cross over the offerings, like, there's a reason behind each and every one of those. Like, it's not just like accumulated accretions with no rhyme or reason. Like, they each have their theological significance behind them. And it's kind of interesting because, like, Pope Francis, in his apostolic letter, Desiderio Desideravi, laments in a Guardinian way the modern man's inability to sense the symbolic. Like, he laments the fact that modern man has become numb to the symbolic. And then it just seems to me that, okay, if we were going to try to reawaken that sense within man, we would try to begin reintroducing some of that rich symbolism into the liturgy. So that's what I say about that. I mean, I feel like, and I don't fully know if this is true. I need to do a little bit more of an in-depth historical analysis of these various gestures within the liturgy, especially during the canon. But I imagine, and again, maybe this is just a incidental consequence. I mean, it probably is, but one thing that makes those gestures pastorally very helpful and necessary is because the canon is said sotto voce, silently. Because the canon is said silently, like I've learned this ever since attending the extraordinary form of the Mass. One of the things that has helped me not have to look at my missal all the time is because I know what he's saying through the gestures, because he's saying silently. And so the gestures communicate to me what he is praying. So, when he just begins to sign crosses over the offerings, I know that he's saying the first part of the Roman canon, which is, to you, their foremost merciful Father, humble prayer and petition that you bless and accept these offerings in every respect, etc. And then when he gets to the communicantes, and he does a little nod to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and then he does the nod to Jesus Christ, I know he's invoking the saints. And then later on in the canon, when he bows down, steps back and bows down, I know he's saying the part where command that these offerings be raised up by your holy angel, or by your holy angel to your altar on high in the sight of your divine majesty. And then when he signs the cross, I know he's saying that that all who will partake of the body and blood of Christ and will be filled with every grace and heavenly blessing. So all of these gestures are able to actually communicate what he is saying. And so I'm wondering if one of the reasons why they took the gestures out is because the fact that the canon is said out loud may remove the pastoral necessity for all of those gestures. But I feel like that, if that was the reasoning, and the reason I haven't done this part yet is because I need to do some research into it first, more research. I've done a lot of research already, but more research. But like I said, I mean, that would be to me a malformed reason to get rid of the gestures, because the gestures, they do more than just signal to us what's happening during the canon. They have richness on their own, right? Regardless of any kind of practical or pragmatic utility. That's one of the elements of the Novus Ordo Mass that that I'm probably most critical of, is the gutting of so much of this rich nonverbal symbolism. I mean, so he asks again about, am I going to touch on the pre-55 stuff? Probably not that much, honestly. Probably not that much. I'll touch on it a little bit, but it's I'll touch on it as minimally as I can, because I feel like there's just so much more that requires central attention. Okay.
Remain the enemy of the Catholic Church.
That's right.
No, yeah. Let me read the oath right here, the Jesuit oath.
Yeah, so Bob the Buildist says a lot of it was omitted because the meaning behind them has been forgotten by the laity. It's like, if it's forgotten by the laity, reteach them, catechize them. And you know what? Sometimes that's okay if they don't know, because it can actually inspire curiosity. They can look at it and say, hey, I wonder why he's doing that. I wonder what that's all about. First of all, I think everybody can understand why he's doing the sign of the cross over the offerings. I mean, that's a no-brainer why he's doing that. I mean, it's a little bit mysterious to get at the more precise reason for why he's doing it at that time, and the fact that each of them signify something a little bit particular. But I think everyone has an intuitive understanding of why he's doing it. But yeah, I mean, that's just a totally bad reason to get rid of it.
My son, heretofore you have been taught to act the dissembler among Roman Catholics, to be a Roman Catholic, and to be a spy even among your own brethren, to believe no man, to trust no man. Among the reformers, to be a reformer. Among the Huguenots, to be a Huguenot. Among the Calvinists, to be a Calvinist. Among the Protestants, generally to be a Protestant. And obtaining their confidence to seek even to...
Yeah, this has absolutely no basis in reality, what he's saying right here. That oath just doesn't exist. Like I said, it originates in Protestant polemics, and it has stayed in there ever since.
Preach from their pulpits, and to denounce with all the vehemence in your nature our holy religion and the Pope. Did you hear that? Right. Undercover Jesuits of the Fourth Vow, they do preach in Protestant churches, and they will preach against the Catholic Church. To be a Protestant like you. Hi, Stephen.
Well, first of all, if they were doing that, then they would be going against the teachings of the Catholic Church, because you're not supposed to lie. And someone would say, oh, well, what about Jesuitical mental reservation? Well, it doesn't extend to that at all.
You have been taught your duty as a spy to gather all statistics, facts, and information in your power from every source, to ingratiate yourself into the confidence of the family circle of Protestants and heretics of every class and character. Did you hear that? Yeah. He has to infiltrate and gain their confidence. Good job what he did on his first documentary about the King James Bible, so that he can what? Be among KJV Bible believers. Good job. That was smart thinking right there. And then after that, put up your other major documentaries to put some sort of Catholic stuff. Look, there's a lot of other teachings to do. Why doesn't he do one on Islam? Islam was more major during today's current events. Why didn't he do that one? Why doesn't he do a Catholic one? That's a good question too, huh? Why doesn't he do a major documentary on Catholic? Why is it a small group of people called Jews? Strange.
So he's carrying water for them, but like his real enemy is the Catholics. That's how you know. Like this, if he's carrying water for them, but going after us, like that's kind of like all that needs to be said.
Let's keep reading right here. So they must infiltrate to gain their confidence in character, as well as that of the merchant, the banker, the lawyer, among the schools and universities, in parliaments and legislatures, and in the judiciaries and councils of state.
That was brutal. That was just brutal.
Isn't that scary? And to be all...
Can this guy read?
All things to all men for the Pope's sake, whose servants we are unto death. This same identical oath can be found in Subterranean Rome by Carlos Didier, translated from the French and published in New York in 1843. It can also be found in the Library of Congress, catalog card number 66-43354. So you notice right here, this is dangerous stuff. So what I'm going to do is this. So there are some people who believe Stephen Anderson is a Jesuit, but for the sake of my testimony among many people watching me, I don't want them to accuse me of being crazy. So I'm not saying that Stephen Anderson is a Jesuit, but I will tell you something right here. It is something to worth think about and to be suspicious of at least. Right. And not only that, let's assume this. Let's even assume he's not a Jesuit. Don't you think there's a bigger conspiracy besides the Jesuits? A bigger conspiracy called Satan. Yeah. And Satan is using this Protestant KJV Bible-believing preacher to insert what? Catholic influence. Right. Yeah. Don't you think that's even more a greater danger than him being influenced by Jesuits? Don't you think that's even a greater danger that Satan would use him? Amen. Because let me ask you this. If Satan didn't taught him to teach this, and we know the Bible never taught him to teach this, what other spiritual force taught him to teach it? Exactly. He is a danger to Bible-believing Christians. Amen. So Stephen Anderson, you got caught with a whore.
See, I was not expecting anyone to accuse him of being a Jesuit. Like, has he watched his commentary on Catholics? This is the same guy who stood behind a podium and like raised his hand up and like raised his fist up, pretending to crumble the Blessed Sacrament and, laughing about it. Okay? This guy is no secret Catholic, I can tell you that much.
And that's going to be my title. Steven Anderson, caught with a whore.
Amen.
Oh, so this is going to be like where I'm sure what they're going to do is they're going to provide these fabricated quotes from popes or some quotes taken out of context where they talk about, them being the vicar of Christ, or some of the outright fabricated quotes about them being like God on earth. It's been a while since I've kind of looked into those, so I won't really be able to speak with much specificity in terms of like where these fabrications actually come from. But obviously, you guys all know that the Pope doesn't claim to be God in the flesh. There's no document that you can point to that demonstrates that. If it is, if there was such a document, I promise you, Catholics would be bringing it up and to each other, asking, how do we deal with this? Okay.
Thousands of years ago, the prophet Isaiah stated the following words: O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, that dwellest between the cherubims, thou art God, even thou alone. Of all the kingdoms of the earth, thou hast made heaven and earth.
Oh, is this that like Ankelbert guy? What's his name again? The guy who moderated that debate with Father Pacwa. Forget what his name is, but I think I know who this is.
Brothers and sisters, we know that end-time prophecy predicts a man of sin will stand on earth proclaiming himself to be a god in the last...
Based? Well, okay, that's not based, but this picture is based. This picture is epic. This is what we want.
Days. Worse yet, he will claim the title of Jesus Christ himself.
Yeah, let's make a giant Pope Benedict XVI statue.
The wonderful thing here is, it is also prophesied that students of prophecy will be able to...
Obviously, like if we were going to do that, the Jesus statue should be way higher, but you know what I mean.
Point this man of sin.
Yeah, John Ankerberg.
It says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, that we should let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, as we look at the churches today, we see a very noticeable falling away from Christ. Today's Christian appears no different than those that deny Christ as Lord. They drink alcohol, they smoke, they have premarital sex, they wear offensive clothing, they listen to rock music, and even go to R-rated movies, just to name a few. And by the way, the standards for rating movies has changed drastically. What they give in...
By the way, like, in terms of the era of American history that had like a very healthy approach to rating movies, you got to thank the Catholic bishops for that. And he's not going to. Like motion picture production code, like the impetus for much of that, the animating like impulse behind much of that was the U.S. bishops.
Our rating 2 today would have been an X rating just 25 years ago.
Well, yeah, I mean, alcohol is obviously not inherently wrong. I mean, first of all, Jesus, his first miracle was to turn water into wine. Okay? Obviously, he's not, he's like, okay, I gotta change, sorry.
So, Since it's so
Okay, I didn't want that video XXX thing to like linger there. But yeah, no, like alcohol. Yeah, Jesus turned water into wine. So obviously, unless you want to say that he's enticing people to sin, which would be blasphemous, then yeah. The smoking thing, I'm a little bit. I know like the trad thing to say is like smoking is actually cool. No, I don't think so. I think it's kind of lame and cringe, frankly.
easily seen today that a falling away from Christ has been...
That doesn't necessarily mean it's always like immoral per se, but yeah, I've never been a fan of it.
...fulfilled by the churches. Has the man of sin also been revealed as the prophecy predicted for today? Is there really a man that claims to be a god on earth right now? Well, besides all the false Christs...
I remember this guy. This Jose Miranda. Yeah.
...are running around today that Satan uses to try to cloud the issue and pull the onus off the real man of sin. There is one church that does have a leader who has claimed to be a god since as far back as 538 A.D. In fact, the leader of this church still claims this title in writing to this day. It seems that John Paul II now presides over the universal church from his place.
Yeah, I mean, okay, Anton, like, one thing you have to understand about me is that when I criticize something, I'm not necessarily saying it's immoral. A lot of Catholics like to do that where they will conflate their personal personal preferences with binding moral precepts. I'm quite resistant to that. Now, I will always uphold like what the church teaches is immoral as immoral. I will always do that, and I'll always stand by all of those things. And furthermore, like, if there's a overwhelming consensus of like theologians that something is morally wrong, then I'll communicate to other people that it's morally wrong and they should check their conscience on it, even if the magisterium hasn't said something about it. But if it's an issue where there's a lot of theological debate among Orthodox Catholics, you're not going to hear me give like a public, you're typically not going to hear me give like a public moral opinion on it. I mean, I might give my own opinion. I might do that, but I will always kind of preface that by saying, hey, look, this is just my opinion. I don't speak on behalf of the church. I don't pretend to be in a position that can impose like an obligation on you unless I can prove that that it pertains to the moral doctrine of the church. So that's just like a way of communicating how I tend to deal with these things. So like with smoking, like, yeah, I'm never going to be the one to say that like it's necessarily in all cases like sinful, but I think it's bad for you. I do think that. Maybe that's cringe, but like I think it's bad for you.
Upon Christ's cross, said Bishop Dunn, who traveled with 7 other prelates to Rome. The Pope is of so great dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man, but as it were, God, and the vicar of God.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things. I recognize this quote, and I know it's a fabrication.
The Pope and God are the same, so he has all power in heaven and earth. Pope Nicholas I declared that the appellation of God had been confirmed by Constantine on the Pope, who, being God, cannot...
See, this, I think it's partially rooted in a real quote, but this being God business is the fabrication. It's really communicating the fact that, the Pope is judged by no one, right? That the first see is judged by no one. And that's the problem. Like a lot of these fake Protestant quotes, they're rooted in like a real quotation, but with fabrications added in.
Be judged by man. The Pope is not only the representative of Jesus Christ, he is Jesus Christ himself, hidden under the veil of the flesh. Now, this blasphemy is not just limited to the popes. The priests themselves have proclaimed themselves to be a god on earth as well. The Bishop of Fort Wayne literally sanctioned the following Vatican-approved statement that says, "Of what sublime dignity is the office of the Christian priest, who is thus privileged to act as the ambassador and the vicegerent of Christ on earth. He continues the essential ministry of Christ. He teaches the faithful with the authority of Christ. He pardons the penitent sinner with the power of Christ. He offers up again the same sacrifice of adoration and atonement which Christ offered on Calvary." No wonder that the name which spiritual writers are especially fond of applying to the priest is that of Alter Christus, which means, for the priest is and should be another Christ. If you like many more quotes.
I mean, that's all true, though. Christ did confer his priestly, like a share in his priestly dignity upon the apostles, and the apostles passed that on to others. And Jesus identifies himself with his church. He does this to Paul when he on the road to Damascus. He says, "Why are you persecuting me?" So he does identify himself with his church, such that the church can stand in his place. The church can channel his priestly presence to the world. This is the direct implication of Christ and the church relating to each other as a bridegroom does to his bride. That's the implication of that, is the one flesh union. And it's not saying that he, on his own power, does these things. Like, he's not offering himself up as the sacrifice. The priest is channeling Christ's act of offering himself up to the Father.
On this topic, just go to the URL you see on the screen right now. Now, if you go to ribbitagon.org, you will find just about 9,000 pages of documented facts that have been accumulated after nearly 30 years of research, proving that absolutely every sinful desire that has ever been known to man have been embraced by the popes of Rome. Everything from murder, from blasphemy to satanic ritual, from bowing to false gods to actually torturing hundreds of millions that refuse to bow in worship to the popes. These horrific acts and countless more have been committed by the popes of the Roman Catholic Church all throughout history. Prophecy stated we would know who the man of sin is in the very last days, and thanks to the historic facts being at our fingertips since the inception of the internet, we now have no doubt as to who fulfills this prophecy today. Still, there's one more piece of evidence you need to see that locks this all down as an absolute prophetic fulfillment by the Roman Catholic popes residing in the Vatican. Now, you've already seen some of the statements made by the popes and the men that worship him, claiming he is a god on earth. But do you recall the statement made by Isaiah the prophet that was shared at the beginning of the video? When speaking of our Creator God, Isaiah the prophet said, "O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, that dwellest between the cherubims, thou art God." Now, Isaiah says our God sits between the cherubims while on his throne. But what does the prophet John say about the throne that Isaiah says he's sitting on? Revelation 20, verse 11 says, "And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them." Now, according to the Scripture, not only does our God sit on a great white throne, he sits between two cherubims. Now notice the following photographs of an actual Roman Catholic Mass in the Vatican. The Christian God truly does know the end from the beginning. His prophetic word proves this rather openly. If you need more information about this man of sin in Rome,
Jesus explicitly says that he wants to have us seated with him at the right hand of the Father. And the Psalm says that that he will raise us up to sit with him. You know, he will raise the poor from the dunghill and seat him with the princes of his people. And it's all about God raising, being friends of God, being co-heirs with God. Like that's heaven, being elevated into friendship with God, participating in the divine nature itself. In the life, you think being on a throne is weird, but well, what about being in the life of the Trinity? That's on offer for every Christian. So it's just ridiculous. Okay, well, that's that. Hope you that was something. Hope you found it interesting. I think I basically fulfilled what I said in the beginning, because I did get into a lot of other topics from the live chat. So I think it was a really worthwhile stream. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you thought that this was interesting. Yeah, I'm going to keep making content, going to keep making short form video content and keep doing streams. On various other things. Definitely going to finish my stream giving that assessment of the Novus Ordo. That's kind of going to be what I'm probably going to work on next. But leave a like if you enjoyed this stream. Become a patron if you want to support my work. Patreon.com/classicaltheist. It really helps out and that's how you get to have me do these various reaction streams, or just do a video on a topic of your choosing, or anything like that. Becoming a patron is a great way to do that. So if you want to support me, support my work, support the work that I do, that's one way you could do it. Or you could just do super chats or super thanks, things like that. Just helps out if you're inclined to do anything like that. Thanks for all of the activity in the chat. Also, I think I really like interacting with you guys. I like having the back and forth conversation. It's really great. So, God bless all of you. Hope you all went to Mass today, by the way, second Sunday of Lent. And hope you're all having a fruitful, prayerful Lent. Hope you're getting in some sacrifice. Hope you're getting in to the spirit of, fasting, prayer, almsgiving, all that wonderful, all those wonderful, enriching spiritual practices that we have. God bless all of you, and